Captain Juno Sable woke up with a headache that felt like someone had used her skull for target practice. The first thing she noticed was the smell, a delightful mix of burnt plastic, alien sweat, and something that could only be described as spaceship locker room. She groaned and opened her eyes to a sight that would make a lesser person cry or laugh hysterically. She wasn't entirely sure which yet. She was in a cell. Classic. The bars were made of some sort of shimmering energy field that looked both pretty and deadly. Juno had a feeling that touching them would provide a shocking experience she'd rather avoid. Her cell was part of a larger setup, a gallery of misery and desperation, each little box holding a variety of life forms from all over the galaxy. She saw a tentacled blob in one, a creature with scales and too many teeth in another, and something that resembled a sentient pile of rocks a few cells down. "Ah, Captain Sable," a voice purred from somewhere outside her field of view, dripping with the kind of smarm that made you want to punch it. "Awake at last." Juno turned her head slowly, partly because of the headache and partly to buy herself time to come up with a suitably scathing reply. A figure stepped into view, tall and slim, wrapped in flowing robes that screamed mysterious and probably evil. His skin was a pale lavender, and his eyes had the kind of glow that suggested he paid extra for them. "Right," she muttered. "I'm stuck in a bad sci-fi cliché with a guy who looks like he moonlights as a nightclub bouncer." The alien's face twisted into a smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. "I am Zalsar, your host for what promises to be a most entertaining ordeal. Welcome to the Zeeth Arena." Juno's stomach dropped. She'd heard of the Zeeth Arena. Everyone had. It was a place where unlucky souls were thrown into combat for the amusement of the galaxy's rich and tasteless. The only thing more certain than a gruesome death was the knowledge that it would be televised for maximum entertainment value. "An arena, really?" Juno said, forcing her voice to stay steady. "Couldn't you have just settled for a nice dinner and some awkward small talk first?" Zalsar chuckled, a sound that was about as comforting as a rattlesnake in a daycare. "Your humor is noted, Captain. It will serve you well in the games, until it doesn't." She rolled her eyes. "Fantastic. I always wanted to be a reality show star. Tell me, do I at least get a snazzy costume?" Zalsar's smile widened, revealing teeth that were too straight and too white to belong to anyone who didn't floss obsessively. "Oh, you're going to be a delight to watch." Juno sighed and leaned back against the cold metal wall of her cell, the implications of her situation settling in like a bad hangover. Stuck in a cage, about to be paraded in front of the galaxy's worst voyeurs, and with zero chance of escape. It wasn't the worst Monday she'd ever had, but it was close. She closed her eyes and tried to focus, to remember how she ended up in this mess. Last she recalled, she was on the bridge of her ship, the Defiant Dawn, a bucket of bolts with more personality than reliability. They'd been on a routine run, transporting what she was assured were legitimate goods to the outer colonies. The kind of job that paid well if you didn't ask too many questions. Then there'd been a blinding flash, a sensation like she was being torn apart and put back together wrong, and then nothing, until now. "So," she said, opening her eyes and fixing Zalsar with her best "I'm going to kill you later" stare. "You lot into human trafficking, or was I just lucky?" Zalsar shrugged with the grace of someone who didn't give a damn. "Your presence here is the result of a most unfortunate navigational error on your part." Juno snorted. "Yeah, right. I bet navigational error is Zeeth speak for we need more cannon fodder and your ship looked easy." Zalsar raised a single, infuriating eyebrow. "As you wish to interpret it, but Captain, you must understand. The arena is not merely a place for combat. It is a stage, a theater where the true nature of beings is revealed." "Let me guess," Juno said. "My true nature is running, screaming, and possibly dying horribly." Zalsar's smile was back, glimmering with the self-satisfaction of someone who already knows how the story ends. "That remains to be seen, Captain." He turned on his heel, robes billowing like a bad special effect, and left her alone to contemplate her fate. Juno resisted the urge to throw something at his retreating back, mainly because all she had to hand was her own frustration, and she couldn't quite reach that far. She let out a long breath and looked around her cell again, this time paying more attention to her fellow captives. Misery, as it turned out, loved company, But that didn't mean it was good company. "Hey," she called out to the tentacled blob next door. It shifted slightly, one eye opening to regard her with what she hoped was mild curiosity and not the alien equivalent of a murderous glare. "You got a name?" The blob quivered for a moment, then a voice echoed in her mind, a whispery, sibilant thing that made her skin crawl. "Names are insignificant here." "Great," Juno muttered. "I guess I'll call you Blobby then." Blobby didn't respond, either too polite to object or, more likely, too indifferent. Juno leaned against the wall again, trying to ignore the throbbing in her head and the sinking feeling in her gut. There was a loud clanging from somewhere out of sight, followed by the sound of heavy footsteps approaching. Juno straightened up, instincts kicking in despite the odds. If she was going to be thrown into an arena, she wasn't going to go down without making a spectacle. A group of guards appeared, hulking brutes in armor that was designed more for intimidation than practicality. They stopped in front of her cell, and the lead one, a creature with too many limbs and not enough brain, jabbed a finger at her. "You human," it grunted. "Time to enter the arena." "Wow," Juno said, doing her best to sound unimpressed. "Your vocabulary is almost as advanced as your fashion sense." The guard didn't rise to the bait, just pressed a button that shut down the energy field around her cell. Juno took a deep breath and stepped out, head held high. As she was led down the corridor toward whatever fresh hell awaited her, she couldn't help but think that at least she wasn't bored anymore. Dark corridors twisted and turned, the kind of place you'd expect to find a discount haunted house. Juno considered her chances of making a break for it, but with guards on every side and a headache from hell, her options were about as promising as a politician's campaign promises. "Any chance this is all a big misunderstanding?" she asked, not really expecting an answer. The guard leading the pack, a hulking brute with a face like an undercooked omelet, turned slightly, one eye bulging suspiciously in her direction. "Walk," it grunted, as if that single word was the extent of its linguistic repertoire. "Nice talking to you, Shakespeare," she muttered, trudging along. The corridor opened up into an enormous chamber, the kind of place designed to make you feel small and insignificant. Tiered seating rose around her like steel cliffs, filled with all sorts of beings, each more bizarre than the last. It was like a zoo, except the animals were the ones watching. The arena floor was a patchwork of sand and metal, weapons scattered about in a way that suggested someone had gone shopping at a clearance sale for murder tools. So much for health and safety regulations. Above it all, a massive screen flickered to life, displaying a countdown timer. Juno squinted at it, wondering how much time she had before she was expected to entertain the masses. "Welcome, competitors." Zalsar's voice boomed, amplified by unseen speakers. Juno looked around, spotting him high above in a luxurious box that suggested he had a preference for lounging while others fought for their lives. Typical. "Today," he continued, "we witness a battle of survival, skill, and sheer luck. Let it be a testament to the unpredictability of life." Juno rolled her eyes, resisting the urge to flip him off. Instead, she turned her attention to the weapons scattered around. If she was going down, she'd at least do it with style. Nearby, another contestant, a wiry creature with skin like cracked porcelain and eyes that glowed dimly, was already inspecting a wicked-looking blade. Juno gave it a nod, a silent acknowledgement of shared doom. "So," she said, picking up a metal staff that felt surprisingly balanced, "do you come here often, or is this a first date kind of thing?" The creature looked at her, expressions inscrutable, and then let out a dry, rattling laugh. "You humans," it said, voice like gravel, "always with the jokes. What can I say? It's how we cope." The timer above them ticked down, the seconds slipping away faster than Juno liked. She tightened her grip on the staff, feeling the weight of it. The cold metal a comfort in an otherwise hostile world. "Here's to surviving," she said, lifting the staff in a mock toast. The creature next to her nodded. "May your death be quick." Juno grinned. "I'll drink to that." The buzzer blared, the crowd roared, and the arena floor erupted into chaos. Juno moved, heart pounding, adrenaline singing in her veins. It was showtime. The arena exploded into chaos like a bad day at an intergalactic fast food joint. Juno dodged left, narrowly avoiding a flying projectile that could have turned her into a human kebab. Around her, A motley crew of aliens and the occasional human bumbled through combat with the grace of a three-legged giraffe on an ice rink. "Watch it!" she snapped at a nearby contestant, a furry biped who looked like a cross between a bear and a cactus. It growled back, swiping at her with a spiked club that missed by a mile. "Charming," Juno muttered, sidestepping yet another potential fatality. It was like a badly organized family reunion, except here, the family members were more interested in disemboweling each other than in awkward small talk about the weather. She swung her staff, knocking a blade from the hands of an over-enthusiastic reptilian who'd clearly watched one too many action holodramas. "Sorry, buddy, but amateur hour's over," she quipped, delivering a swift kick that sent it sprawling. Somewhere above, Zalsar was probably watching, sipping on alien wine and laughing his pale lavender ass off. Juno imagined his smug face, probably as pleased as a cat in a room full of limbless mice. The thought annoyed her more than the prospect of dying. As the frenzy continued, a few of the more sensible contestants began to consolidate, forming loose alliances born out of desperation rather than trust. A group of humans clustered together, eyeing the alien competitors like a pack of wolves eyeing a herd of slightly confused sheep. Juno made her way over, hoping they were smart enough not to immediately turn on her. "Mind if I join this little party?" she asked, twirling her staff in what she hoped was an impressive display of competence. A man with a scarred face and the build of someone who'd spent too much time lifting heavy things gave her a once-over. "Depends. You any good with that stick?" "Better than you with that face," she shot back. It was a gamble, but grim humor had a way of endearing people in these situations, or getting you punched in the face. Thankfully, it was the former. The man snorted. "Fair enough. Name's Keller. Welcome to the losing team." "Juno," she replied, resisting the urge to curtsy. "Was beginning to think I was the only one with a sense of humor around here." A woman with tattoos covering every patch of visible skin and hair that looked like it had been styled with a grenade piped up. "Trust me, we're laughing on the inside, mostly because it's the only thing keeping us from crying." Juno liked her immediately. "You've got a name, or should I just call you Ink?" "Ink works," the woman said with a grin, "though my mom prefers Kelly." A familiar buzzing sound filled the air, drawing everyone's attention to the massive screen. Zalsar's face loomed large, looking altogether too pleased with himself. "An impressive display so far," he announced. "But let us see how our contestants fare with a little encouragement." Juno didn't like the sound of that. True to form, the arena floor began shifting, metal panels sliding open to reveal an assortment of unpleasant obstacles. Spinning blades, fiery pits, and a few other nasties she couldn't quite identify but knew would be equally unpleasant. "Well, isn't this just peaky?" Keller grumbled, hefting a spiked club. "Anyone else feel like a hamster in a particularly sadistic wheel?" "I'd say more like a cockroach in a microwave," Ink replied, adjusting her grip on a wicked-looking dagger. Juno examined the shifting landscape, her mind working overtime to plot a way through. "You know, I always thought life was supposed to flash before your eyes when you're about to die, but all I'm seeing is a whole lot of bad TV shows." Ink chuckled, but her eyes were sharp, scanning their surroundings. "Got any brilliant ideas, Captain?" "Not dying seems like a good start," Juno replied, eyeing the arena's newest death traps with a healthy dose of skepticism. The arena was a maze of death, and navigating it would require a delicate touch or a really good run of luck. Juno was banking on the latter, mostly because subtlety wasn't her strong suit. "Stick together," Keller barked, rallying the small band of survivors. "Let's show these bastards we're not just here to become a smear on the floor." The group moved as one, ducking and weaving through the chaos. Juno stayed close to Ink, the two of them watching each other's backs. They sidestepped a gaping pit, Ink laughing as she narrowly avoided slipping in. "Guess I really put my foot in it there," she joked, breathless. "Save the footwork for the dance floor," Juno replied, helping her regain her balance. The arena was a cacophony of screams, roars, and the incessant buzz of Zalsar's commentary echoing over the crowd. Juno tuned it out, focusing on the here and now, on survival. Around her, the bodies piled up, the weak falling to the strong, the slow to the quick. A flash of movement caught her eye, a tall, insectoid creature lunging at them, mandibles snapping. Juno reacted instinctively, swinging her staff in a wide arc. The creature crumpled, more surprised than injured. "Nice swing," Ink remarked appreciatively. "I had a good coach," Juno replied, already scanning for the next threat. "Taught me everything I know about improvising." The floor shifted again, a series of metal pillars rising from below, creating a new layer of obstacles. Juno exchanged a look with her newfound allies. "This just keeps getting better, doesn't it?" Keller grunted. "Keep moving. We stand still, we die." A straightforward sentiment, but one that resonated with everyone present. They pressed forward, a ragtag band of survivors in a world that seemed determined to chew them up and spit them out. Time seemed to blur, the world distilled into a series of rapid movements and narrow escapes. Finally, the cacophony around them faded, the remaining contestants spread out across the arena. Juno found herself panting, muscles aching with exertion, but still very much alive. "Not bad for day's work," Ink remarked, wiping sweat from her brow. "But I don't suppose you've got a plan for when we run out of steam." Juno glanced around at the battered survivors, many of whom were eyeing each other warily. "I'm working on it. Just need to keep these guys entertained a bit longer." "And how exactly do you plan to do that?" Keller asked, his tone skeptical. "Well," Juno said, a mischievous glint in her eye, "they say the secret to good entertainment is giving the audience something they didn't expect." Ink raised an eyebrow. "You got some kind of trick up your sleeve, Captain." "More like a wild card," Juno replied, a plan slowly forming in her mind. "Remember what Zalsar said, this place is about revealing true natures. Let's use that to our advantage." Keller snorted. "Great, so we're betting our lives on a long shot." "Pretty much," Juno admitted. "But hey, if we're going down, we might as well do it with style." Ink laughed, a genuine sound in the midst of all the chaos. "I like your style, Captain. Lead on." Juno nodded, her resolve hardening. She took a deep breath, ready to bet it all on the unpredictability of human nature. The crowd wanted a show. She'd give them one they wouldn't soon forget. As the dust settled and the arena grew still, Juno stood tall, casting a defiant glare at the observation box where Zalsar sat. She was ready to turn the tables. "All right, folks," she called to the other survivors. "Let's give them a performance worth watching." With that, she charged forward, her allies following, ready to exploit the one thing the Zeeth couldn't control, the sheer, chaotic brilliance of human improvisation. Juno's plan was risky, but if there was one thing humanity was good at, it was throwing a wrench into the works. As the remaining contestants moved forward, she felt a flicker of hope. Maybe, just maybe, they could outwit their captors. "Keep your heads down," she advised, dodging another spinning blade. "And for the love of sanity, don't get killed." Ink laughed, albeit with a hint of hysteria. "You're a real motivational speaker, you know that." "Comes with the territory," Juno replied, keeping her eyes peeled for any opportunity to turn the tide. The arena shifted again, more obstacles revealing themselves like a bad magician revealing yet another rabbit from a hat. Around her, the survivors moved together, an unspoken understanding binding them. Juno's heart raced, adrenaline fueling her every move. The floor beneath them began to rumble ominously, a sure sign that Zalsar had another trick up his sleeve. And sure enough, more challenges sprang to life, the arena shifting into a nightmarish labyrinth. But Juno wasn't discouraged. If anything, the increasing odds only made her more determined. She was going to survive this, and she was going to rub it in Zalsar's smug lavender face. "You still with me?" she called to Ink and Keller as they navigated the treacherous terrain. "Barely," Ink replied, dodging a burst of flame that leapt up unexpectedly. Keller, swatting away a drone-like annoyance, grunted. "You got that escape plan ready yet?" "I'm working on it," Juno replied, scanning the arena for any sign of egress. "Just a few more distractions and we might have our chance." The arena continued to shift, Zalsar's voice booming with orchestrated enthusiasm. Around her, the crowd roared, a cacophony of cheers and jeers. "Step right up, folks," she muttered under her breath. "See the amazing human and her band of misfits defy the odds." Juno led her group through the chaos, weaving between obstacles with a mix of desperation and determination. They were running out of room and Juno knew their time was limited, but she refused to give up. "Keep going," she shouted, urging her allies on. "We're almost there." Suddenly, the floor beneath them gave way, a section collapsing into a pit of writhing machinery. Juno stumbled, barely catching herself in time. "Juno," Ink called, reaching out to steady her. "I'm good," Juno panted, regaining her footing. "Just keep moving." The arena was a swirling maelstrom of danger, but Juno could see the end in sight. She just needed one more chance, one more opening, and then she saw it. A section of the arena less guarded, more vulnerable. It was a long shot, but it was the best they had. "There," she shouted, pointing. "That's our exit." Keller looked skeptical. "You sure about this, Captain?" Juno grinned, a wild, reckless grin, not even a little bit. Ink laughed, shaking her head. "Let's do it." They charged forward, a ragtag group of survivors in a race against the inevitable. The crowd's roar echoed around them, the arena's deadly traps closing in from all sides. Juno surged ahead, adrenaline propelling her forward. She could feel the eyes of the galaxy upon her, the weight of their expectations pressing down. But she was Juno's Sable, and she wasn't about to give them the satisfaction of seeing her fall. With a final burst of speed, she led the charge, her allies following her lead. The exit loomed ahead, a beacon of hope in a world of chaos. As they reached the edge, the arena began to collapse, the floor giving way beneath them. Juno leapt, heart in her throat, praying her gamble would pay off. And then she was flying, soaring through the air, the roar of the crowd fading into nothingness. For a moment, time seemed to stand still. It was just her and the stars, a brief moment of peace in a universe that seemed determined to tear her apart. And then she landed, rolling to her feet, heart pounding, breath coming in ragged gasps. She'd done it. They'd done it. Juno looked around, meeting the astonished gazes of her fellow survivors. They'd escaped, defied the odds, and she knew without a doubt that the galaxy had just witnessed something truly remarkable. As she caught her breath, she couldn't help but laugh, the sound echoing in the sudden silence. "Sorry, Zalsar," she murmured, a grin spreading across her face. "Looks like the humans win this round." And with that, she led her band of misfits into the unknown, ready for whatever lay ahead. Juno Sable stood in the middle of the chaos that was the Zeeth arena, her mind buzzing with equal parts adrenaline and sheer bloody-mindedness. Around her, the screams and roars of the crowd blended into a single, relentless drone. Somewhere up there, that smug bastard Zalsar was watching, probably with a drink in one hand and a remote control for the traps in the other. "All right," Juno said, her voice barely more than a growl. "Time to throw a wrench in the works." Ink, her partner in crime and often questionable wisdom, looked at her with a mix of skepticism and curiosity. "You got a plan, Captain, or are we just winging it like usual?" "Both," Juno replied with a shrug. "The Zeeth think they can predict our every move, right? Let's see how they handle a few random acts of chaos." Keller, their ever-grumpy companion, snorted. "Random acts of chaos. That sounds like a Monday for us." "Exactly," Juno said, eyes scanning the arena for opportunities. "But this time, we're doing it on purpose." With the arena still shifting like a drunken kaleidoscope, Juno knew they had to act fast. Their previous little escapade had been a miracle, but luck was a fickle mistress, and Juno was pretty sure they'd already overstayed their welcome in her good graces. "All right," Juno called out, rallying the rest of their ragtag group. "We've got to start doing the unexpected, throw off their predictions." Ink raised an eyebrow. "And how do we do that? Start doing the Macarena?" "Something like that," Juno said, grinning. "Think of it as improv in a gladiatorial setting." Keller shrugged. "Hell, why not? I've got nothing better planned today." The arena floor shifted again, but this time Juno wasn't caught off guard. Instead, she watched, waited. She had a theory, a tiny spark of an idea that maybe, just maybe, they could exploit whatever system the Zeeth were using to predict their movements. "All right, everyone split up," Juno ordered. "Do whatever comes to mind. Dance, shout, spin in circles. Just make it unpredictable." The group exchanged dubious glances but complied. If there was one thing they trusted, it was Juno's knack for finding the edge of survival and balancing on it like a circus performer on a high wire. As if on cue, Ink started doing an awkward jig, a mix between a dance and a series of convulsions. Keller muttered something that sounded suspiciously like idiots, but joined in nonetheless, arms flailing with abandon. Juno herself opted for something slightly more subtle, weaving through the obstacles with a zigzag pattern that would have confused a drunken bee. "Let's see how you handle this, you overgrown jellyfish," she muttered under her breath, glancing up at the observation box where Zalsar undoubtedly sat, perhaps puzzled, perhaps intrigued. For a moment, nothing happened. The arena continued its mechanical dance, a heartless machine in a world of chaos. But then, Juno noticed something. A slight delay, a momentary hesitation in the trap's movements. "Keep it up," she shouted, hope surging within her. "It's working." Ink, her dance now looking more like a seizure, laughed. "At least we're dying with style." The chaos continued, but Juno could feel the shift. The Zeeth weren't omnipotent. They had their limits, and human unpredictability was stretching those limits to breaking point. Juno's mind raced, trying to string together the pieces of an escape plan. If they could keep this up, keep the Zeeth guessing, they might just find the crack in the armor they needed. "Okay, new game plan," Juno announced, gathering her breath. "We need to find the weakest point on this dance floor of death." Keller paused mid-flail. "Oh, is that all? I thought we were going to make it challenging." Juno ignored him, her eyes scanning the arena. If they could make the Zeeth hesitate, they might be able to force an opening. "Look for anything out of place," she instructed. "Anything that doesn't quite fit." Ink, still bouncing around like a caffeinated rabbit, nodded. "Gotcha, Captain. Find the odd sock in the laundry." They spread out again, their movements no longer completely random but still unpredictable. A strange rhythm developed between them, one that defied the cold logic of Zeeth calculations. And then Juno saw it, a panel that flickered, just for a second, revealing a gap in the seamless metal floor. It was small, almost insignificant, but in their world of peril, it might as well have been a neon sign screaming "Exit here." "There," Juno pointed, adrenaline spiking her veins. "That's our way out." Keller squinted, the gleam of hope battling with skepticism. "You sure about this?" "Sure as I'll ever be," Juno replied. "And any exit is better than this death trap." Ink, sweat dripping down her face, gave a weary grin. "Then let's make some bad decisions together." They converged on the panel, their chaotic movements designed to keep the arena's AI on the back foot. The crowd's noise became a distant hum, their jeers and cheers irrelevant in the face of potential freedom. Juno reached the panel, her heart thundering in her chest. "All right, everyone ready." "Ready as I'll ever be to kiss my ass goodbye," Keller grumbled, but there was an edge of determination in his voice. Ink gave a thumbs up. "Let's blow this popsicle stand." Juno took a deep breath, gathering every ounce of courage and recklessness. She knew the stakes, knew the risks, but there was no turning back now. "On my mark," she said, waiting until her makeshift family was in position. Now, with a collective shout, they pounced on the panel, prying it open with desperate strength. Beneath lay a narrow tunnel, a dark promise of escape. "Go, go, go," Juno ordered, ushering them through. One by one, they slipped into the tunnel, leaving behind the chaos of the arena. As Juno followed, she couldn't resist a final glance back at the observation box. "Sorry, Zalsar," she muttered, a savage grin spreading across her face. "Looks like your toys aren't as foolproof as you thought." And with that, she disappeared into the darkness, leaving the roar of the crowd behind. The tunnel was cramped, the metallic walls pressing in on them from all sides. But it was freedom, and Juno would take a claustrophobic corridor over an arena of death any day. Ink, somewhere ahead in the tunnel, laughed breathlessly. "I can't believe that worked. I mean, seriously, what are the odds?" Keller, crawling behind Juno, snorted, "Knowing us pretty damn good." "Keep moving," Juno urged, her voice echoing in the confined space. "We're not out of the woods yet." The tunnel twisted and turned, a labyrinthine journey that seemed to go on forever. Juno could feel the panic of confinement creeping in, but she shoved it aside, focusing on the end goal. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, they emerged into a dimly lit corridor, the stark industrial design a stark contrast to the arena's garish spectacle. Juno took a moment to catch her breath, leaning against the wall. "Well, that was fun. Let's not do it again." Ink, her usual sarcastic self, chuckled. "You say that, but I bet we're going to find another way to nearly get killed soon enough." "Yeah, Keller agreed, rubbing a bruise that was forming on his shoulder. We really are good at this whole survival thing in the most backward way possible. Juno straightened, her humor tempered by the weight of reality. All right, jokes aside, we need to keep moving. The Zeeth aren't going to let us go without a fight. They moved down the corridor, each step taking them further from the arena's deadly embrace. Despite the exhaustion, Juno couldn't help but feel a thrill of success. Against all odds, they'd made it this far. As they navigated the maze of passages, Juno's mind churned with possibilities. They were still deep in enemy territory, and one wrong turn could land them right back in the frying pan. But for now, they were free, and that was enough. What do you think we'll find at the end of this rabbit hole? Ink asked, trying to keep the mood light. Hopefully not a Zeeth welcoming committee, Keller grumbled. Juno shrugged, her gaze fixed ahead. Whatever it is, it can't be worse than what we've already faced. They continued in silence, the weight of their escape slowly settling in. The corridor stretched out before them, a promise of something beyond survival. For the first time in what felt like forever, Juno allowed herself a moment to hope. Maybe, just maybe, they could find a way off this hellhole of a planet. Maybe there was more to life than being pawns in someone else's game. And maybe, just maybe, they'd get to live long enough to find out. Juno's mind flickered back to Zalsar, the architect of their torment, and she couldn't help but grin. She couldn't wait to see the look on his face when he realized that his prized arena had become just another stage for human resilience. "Hey, Juno," Ink called, breaking into her thoughts. "Yeah," Juno replied, her voice steady and strong. "Thanks for not getting us killed back there." Juno chuckled, her gaze never wavering from the path ahead. "Don't thank me yet. We've still got a long way to go." And as they pressed on into the unknown, Juno knew one thing for sure. They might not have all the answers, but they had each other. And that was a start. The tunnel seemed to stretch on forever, a winding snake of claustrophobic metal that refused to reveal its exit. Captain Juno Sable trudged ahead, her mind a whirlwind of plans, contingencies, and a smattering of profanity aimed at anyone who had ever thought gladiatorial combat arenas were a good idea. The irony of fighting for survival was not lost on her, especially when survival meant crawling through a tube narrower than her patience. Ink, ever the bright spark in the dark, piped up from somewhere ahead. "Hey, Juno, you think we'll pop out in the gift shop? I could use a souvenir from the time we nearly died for sport." "Sure," Juno muttered. "Maybe they'll have a I survived the Zeeth arena, and all I got was this lousy t-shirt." Keller, bringing up the rear like a reluctant caboose, grumbled something incomprehensible but probably unflattering about their chances. Juno chose to believe it was optimistic in spirit, if not in content. As they pressed on, the walls reverberated with distant mechanical groans, a reminder that freedom was a slippery concept here. The Zeeth, those overgrown amoebas with delusions of grandeur, were probably scrambling to figure out how their perfect, infallible system had been bested by a ragtag bunch of humans who danced like they'd been hit by a stun grenade. The tunnel finally belched them into a wider corridor, where the air was marginally less oppressive, and the walls didn't feel like they were trying to give them a group hug. Juno took a moment to breathe, the metallic taste of tension still clinging to her tongue. Ink was already scanning the surroundings with the eagerness of a kid in a candy store that sold only existential dread. "Well, this ain't Disneyland," she said, looking around. "More like, what escape room from hell? Please." Keller grunted, examining a particularly nasty bruise on his arm, as if hell would have such tacky decor. Juno shook her head, her mind already racing ahead. "Focus, people. The Zeeth are going to send someone after us sooner or later. We need to keep moving." Ink shot her a mock salute. "Aye, aye, Captain. Lead us to glorious victory or hilarious demise." The corridor stretched ahead, its end obscured by shadows that seemed to whisper promises of danger and potential ambushes. They moved cautiously, the silence only occasionally punctuated by the echo of their footsteps and the occasional groan of the ship's ancient infrastructure. "You know," Ink mused, "it's too quiet, like horror movie quiet." "Yeah," Keller agreed, squinting into the gloom. "I keep expecting a guy with a chainsaw to jump out." "If only," Juno said dryly, "at least he'd be predictable." They continued on, each step bringing them deeper into the bowels of the Zeeth's twisted domain. The tension was a living thing, crawling over their skin, digging into their nerves. Juno could almost imagine the Zeeth watching their every move, those alien eyes calculating, devising, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. Ink, ever the optimist, kept their spirits buoyed with a steady stream of commentary. Think we'll find a kitchen. I could go for a space hamburger. Maybe a side of despair fries. Hold the hope. If they've got a bar, Keller added, I'm never leaving. Juno snorted, the levity a welcome respite from the oppressive atmosphere. We make it out of here, drinks are on me. A junction loomed ahead, the corridors branching off like the arms of a starship octopus. Juno paused, evaluating their options, or lack thereof. Left or right? Ink peered down each passageway theatrically, as if expecting one to reveal a neon exit sign. Left looks less murdery. You say that, Keller grumbled, but I swear I heard something that way, probably something hungry. Right it is then, Juno decided, steering them down the path of presumed least resistance, though in her experience that was often the one that ended in the most scars. The corridor twisted and turned, leading them deeper into the labyrinthine structure. The oppressive quiet began to erode at their nerves, each creak and groan of the ship a potential harbinger of doom. Eventually, they stumbled upon a room, a large, echoing chamber that seemed to serve no purpose whatsoever other than to be a potential trap. Juno eyed it suspiciously, well aware that it was too open, too inviting, and clearly too good to be true. Hold up, she cautioned, stopping at the threshold. This screams bait. Ink poked her head past the doorway, curiosity warring with common sense. What do you think? Snacks or an alligator pit? It's never snacks, Keller sighed, resigned. Juno examined the room from her vantage point, looking for anything that might clarify whether stepping inside was suicidal or merely stupid. There were no immediate signs of danger, no hidden panels, no ominous hum of energy weapons preparing to vaporize them, just silence and space. All right, she said, making a decision. We go in, but keep your eyes peeled. The Zeeth wouldn't just leave a room like this unguarded. They entered cautiously, spreading out to cover more ground while remaining within shouting distance in case things went sideways, which, given their luck, was basically a matter of when, not if. Ink wandered toward one side, examining a console that looked like it hadn't been used since the dawn of time. Think this does anything? She asked, poking at it with all the deftness of a cat discovering a new toy. If it explodes, Keller warned, I'm blaming you. Ink stuck her tongue out at him but refrained from further prodding. Juno had to admit, the room was a puzzle, one she would rather not solve by tripping a hidden death trap. They moved cautiously, the large space amplifying every sound they made. Each footfall, every breath seemed to echo off the walls, creating a symphony of tension that threatened to drown out their thoughts. Nothing here, Ink declared, sounding almost disappointed. Just a bunch of junk. Keller kicked at a piece of debris which clattered harmlessly across the floor. Junk or secret doomsday device. Knowing our luck, Juno muttered, probably both. They regrouped in the center of the room, their initial wariness giving way to reluctant acceptance. If this was a trap, it was a damn subtle one. So what's the plan? Ink asked, glancing expectantly at Juno. Aside from not dying, obviously. Juno hesitated, considering their options. The Zeeth would undoubtedly be closing in, and standing around wasn't going to help their cause. But they couldn't just wander aimlessly, hoping to stumble upon an exit. Let's find a terminal, Juno suggested. If we can access the ship systems, maybe we can figure out where we are, and more importantly, how to get out. Keller nodded, his usual grumpiness tempered by a flicker of hope. And maybe we can find something to screw over the Zeeth while we're at it. Ink grinned, already on the move. Now you're speaking my language. They spread out again, searching for anything that might provide a clue to their next move. The room, though barren at first glance, had a few nooks and crannies that could harbor secrets, or at least something useful. Juno's eyes skimmed over the walls, looking for anything that resembled a control panel. Her fingers itched to interact with the technology, to find some leverage in this game of cat and mouse. The Zeeth might have underestimated them once, but they wouldn't make that mistake twice. Ink, ever resourceful, let out a triumphant shout from across the room. Got something. Looks like an access terminal. Juno and Keller joined her, gathering around the dusty console. It was ancient, the screen flickering like a dying star, but it might just be their ticket out. "All right," Juno said, taking a deep breath. She had a talent for coaxing information out of reluctant machines, a knack for making technology do her bidding. "Let's see if we can figure this out before the Zeeth do." Keller crossed his arms, eyeing the console dubiously. "And if it doesn't work?" "Then we're screwed," Juno replied with a shrug. "But let's pretend it will." Ink leaned against the panel, watching with interest. "At least it'll be a fun show either way." Juno set to work, her fingers dancing over the controls with precision born of desperation. The screen sputtered to life, displaying lines of code that might have been ancient runes for all their coherence. But beneath the chaos lay order, a system waiting to be unraveled. As she worked, Juno felt the familiar rush of adrenaline, a thrill that cut through the fear and uncertainty. This was a problem she could solve, a challenge she could rise to. The Zeeth might have had the upper hand, but she was determined to wrest it back. "Okay," she muttered, her focus narrowing to a laser-like intensity. "Let's see what you're hiding." The console coughed up data, slowly at first, then in a flood of information that spilled across the screen like a dam bursting. Maps, schematics, logs of the arena's workings, all there, waiting to be deciphered. "Looks like we hit the jackpot," Juno announced, her grin as sharp as a knife's edge. Ink peered over her shoulder, eyes wide with gleeful anticipation. "Think we can use this to mess with the Zeeth's plans?" "That's the idea," Juno replied, her fingers flying over the keys. She could feel the pieces falling into place, a jigsaw puzzle of escape that was starting to take shape. Keller, ever the pessimist, scratched his chin. "And if they catch us before we can use it?" Juno glanced up, her expression one of grim determination. "Then we go down swinging." With a shared nod, they returned to their work, each of them driven by the promise of freedom and the thrill of sticking it to their captors. The stakes were high, and the odds stacked against them, but they had one thing the Zeeth would never understand: the human penchant for chaos. As the minutes ticked by, Juno felt the weight of their situation pressing down, a constant reminder of the danger that lurked just beyond the edges of their fragile sanctuary. Yet beneath it all there was hope, a stubborn, unyielding spark that refused to be snuffed out. "Got it," Juno finally declared, a note of triumph in her voice. She'd managed to access the ship's layout, a sprawling map that promised a way out if they were clever and lucky enough to reach it. Ink punched the air, her exuberance infectious. "We're actually doing this. We might actually make it out of here." "Don't jinx it," Keller warned, though the corners of his mouth were twitching in what might have been a smile. "Let's save the victory dance for when we're not being hunted." Juno nodded, her eyes fixed on the screen, memorizing every twist and turn of their potential escape route. "All right, let's move. We've got a way out, and a chance to turn the tables on the Zeeth." With renewed determination, they left the room behind, each step taking them closer to their goal. The path ahead was fraught with peril, the odds astronomical, but they had something worth fighting for. And as they plunged once more into the depths of the Zeeth ship, Juno couldn't help but think that maybe, just maybe, they'd finally found their way out of the darkness. As the trio exited the room, the familiar hum of the Zeeth ship enveloped them like an unwelcome embrace. The corridors twisted ahead, a maze designed by someone who apparently hated straight lines and human optimism. Juno led the way, the weight of their precarious situation nestled comfortably on her shoulders like an old, irritating friend. "All right," she muttered, studying the map glowing on her wrist comp. "We take a left here, then down the main passage until we hit the big, glaring obstacle that'll probably try to kill us." "Sounds cozy," Ink chimed in, her voice dripping with sarcasm. "Do they offer complimentary death threats, or is that extra?" Keller, ever the ray of sunshine, grunted from the back. "Bet they throw in an existential crisis for free. The Zeeth are generous like that." Juno shot him a sideways glance, the corners of her mouth twitching despite the tension. "Just remember, we've got a plan. Kind of." "Kind of," Ink echoed, grinning like a lunatic who just found a particularly shiny knife. "My favorite kind of plan. It's the what could possibly go wrong version." As they moved down the corridor, the oppressive silence was replaced by the distant sound of mechanical whirring, like the gears of the universe slowly grinding towards their doom. It was all very atmospheric, in a we're all gonna die sort of way. The further they went, the more Juno's confidence wavered. The Zeeth were tightening the noose, and she could feel their unseen eyes scrutinizing every move, every breath. It was disconcerting, knowing that somewhere out there, someone was probably placing bets on how long they'd survive. How much you reckon we're worth in Zeeth bucks? Ink mused, seemingly reading Juno's mind. Probably less than the cost of the energy it'll take to fry us, Keller replied, his tone as dry as a desert sense of humor. Great, now I'm feeling cheap, Ink said with mock indignation. I was hoping for at least a mid-range bounty, maybe with a side of notoriety. Their banter was abruptly cut short as they rounded a corner, only to find their path blocked by another energy field. This one crackled with a menace that almost seemed personal, like it had been waiting just for them. Of course, Juno muttered, eyeing the field with disdain. You'd think they'd at least roll out the red carpet. Red carpet, more like a red smear once they're done with us, Keller quipped, crossing his arms like he was daring the universe to contradict him. Juno approached the barrier, inspecting it for weaknesses. Her mind raced through options, most of them terrible. The Zeeth had a knack for creating situations where all choices led to misery. It was almost admirable in a sadistic sort of way. Ink leaned closer, her expression one of exaggerated curiosity. So, do we try and hack it or just hit it with a rock and hope for the best? Can we do both? Keller asked, his voice full of faux enthusiasm. I do like a good rock. Juno sighed, tapping her chin as she considered their options. The map suggested an alternative route, one that required backtracking and a whole lot of luck. But the Zeeth weren't known for leaving convenient exits unguarded. Before she could voice a decision, an all-too-familiar voice crackled over the ship's intercom, dripping with smug superiority. Zalsar, the Zeeth puppet master, speaking to them as if they were favorite pets gone astray. Ah, Captain Sable, the voice purred, each syllable a calculated taunt. I see you found our little surprise. Do you like it? We made it especially for you. Juno gritted her teeth, resisting the urge to shout into the void. Gee, Zalsar, I'm flattered. But you know, flowers would have been cheaper. Zalsar chuckled, the sound as oily as a mechanic's rag. Why waste time with flowers when we can enjoy the drama of your struggles? Entertainment value, after all. Glad we're keeping your ratings up, Ink shot back, her voice sugar-coated with venom. Maybe we should charge admission. Do keep up the bravado, Zalsar replied, a hint of amusement in his tone. It makes your inevitable demise all the more delicious. The intercom clicked off, leaving a silence that felt somehow heavier for its abruptness. Juno clenched her fists, rage simmering beneath her skin. She was tired of playing the puppet in Zalsar's twisted game. All right, she said, her voice steely with determination. We backtrack, find another way. We're not giving that bastard the satisfaction. Ink and Keller nodded, their own resolve solidifying in the wake of Zalsar's taunts. They turned, retracing their steps with a new urgency. The path behind them was no less daunting, filled with the same sense of impending doom, but at least it was a path they chose. As they moved, the ship seemed to hum louder, a mechanical beast awakening to their presence. Every shadow felt like a threat, every sound a possible ambush. Juno's grip tightened on her staff, ready to fight or flee at a moment's notice. The corridors twisted and turned, leading them deeper into the ship's bowels. Each step felt heavier, doubt gnawing at the edges of their resolve. The map was their lifeline, a beacon of hope in the oppressive darkness, but even it couldn't account for the Zeeth's unpredictable cruelty. Yet, even as their situation seemed increasingly dire, Juno couldn't help but feel a spark of defiance. The Zeeth might control their fate, but they couldn't control their spirit, and if they were going down, they'd do it with style, and preferably a middle finger raised in defiance. Hey Juno, Ink said suddenly, breaking the heavy silence. If we make it out of here, I'm thinking of taking up knitting, something relaxing. Juno snorted, the absurdity of the statement cutting through her tension. Knitting, I'd pay to see that. Better than this rat race, Ink replied, grinning. Plus, I hear it's great for stress. Keller rolled his eyes, a rare smile tugging at his lips. I'll stick to grumbling, thanks. Less chance of accidentally stabbing myself. The banter eased the tension, if only slightly, grounding them in the here and now rather than the what-ifs. The Zeeth might be pulling the strings, but they couldn't take away their ability to laugh in the face of certain doom. They continued through the ship, their footsteps echoing like a promise of rebellion. The map led them to a new corridor, one that seemed less traveled, less guarded. It was a sliver of hope, a path that might just lead to freedom. But as they pressed on, Juno couldn't shake the feeling that they were being herded, guided towards some unseen end. The Zeeth were nothing if not sadistically clever, and she couldn't help but wonder if they were playing right into their hands. "Hey, what's that?" Ink said suddenly, pointing ahead. Juno squinted, seeing what looked like a door, a real, honest-to-goodness door, sans the energy field. It was either an oversight or a trap, and she wasn't sure which was worse. "Guess we knock and see who's home," Keller suggested, his voice dripping with deadpan humor. Juno approached cautiously, scanning for anything that might hint at an ambush. The door was unmarked, unassuming, and completely out of place in the chaos of the ship. It almost seemed inviting, which made her more suspicious than ever. "All right, let's do this," she said, nodding to her companions. Ink gave a mock salute. "Here goes nothing." With a deep breath, Juno reached for the door's control panel, her heart pounding like a war drum. She keyed in the sequence, half expecting the ship to explode in protest. Instead, the door slid open with a smooth hiss, revealing a room bathed in dim, flickering light. They entered cautiously, weapons at the ready. The room was empty, save for a console similar to the one they'd found earlier. It hummed softly, the screen displaying a maelstrom of data that made Juno's head spin. "Looks like another jackpot," Ink said, moving forward. "Think we can rig this one to, I dunno, explode in a glorious blaze of vengeance?" Keller nodded approvingly. "I do like explosions." Juno approached the console, her mind racing with possibilities. If they could hijack the ship systems, even temporarily, they might create enough chaos to slip away. It was a long shot, but it was all they had. As she set to work, the room seemed to close in around them, the oppressive weight of their situation pressing down like a physical force. The Zeeth were watching, waiting for them to slip up, and she was determined not to give them the satisfaction. "All right, let's see what we can do," Juno murmured, her focus narrowing to the task at hand. The console responded sluggishly, as if aware of her desperation. It fought her at every turn, systems locked behind layers of encryption designed to frustrate even the most patient hacker. But Juno was nothing if not stubborn. Minutes stretched into eternity as she worked, lines of code blurring together in a tangled mess. Ink and Keller kept watch, their eyes scanning the shadows for any sign of movement. They were a team now, a unit forged in the fires of adversity, and they'd fight to the bitter end. The console beeped suddenly, a triumphant sound that echoed like a victory cry. Juno's heart leapt, hope flaring anew as she accessed the ship's controls. It wasn't much, just a brief window, a flicker of opportunity, but it was enough. "Got it," she said, unable to keep the excitement from her voice. "We've got control for now." Ink grinned, a feral edge to her smile. "So what's the plan? Do we turn off the lights and run, or unleash hell and see what sticks?" Keller shrugged, his expression one of grim determination. "Why not both?" Juno nodded, urgency propelling her forward. This was their chance, and she wasn't about to waste it. With swift, sure movements, she initiated a shutdown sequence, plunging the ship into darkness. The lights flickered, then died, leaving them in an ink-high blackness that was both terrifying and liberating. In the chaos, alarms began to blare, a cacophony that promised pandemonium throughout the ship. "Time to go," Juno said, her heart pounding with adrenaline. They moved swiftly, navigating the darkness by memory and instinct. The ship was a maze, but they knew the path now. Each twist and turn burned into their minds. They'd find their way out or die trying. As they ran, Juno couldn't help but feel a surge of defiance. The Zeeth might have controlled their fate, but they couldn't control their spirit. They were human, irreverent and unyielding, and they'd fight until the bitter end. Behind them, the ship's systems sputtered and struggled, a testament to their rebellion. The Zeeth would recover, no doubt, but not before they'd made their mark, not before they'd shown the universe what it meant to be human. And as they raced toward the promise of freedom, Juno couldn't help but think that maybe, just maybe, they'd finally found their way out of the darkness. Juno's Sable paused for a moment in the darkness, her breath steadying as the adrenaline coursed through her veins. The ship's alarm was a melodic chaos, echoing off the metal walls like a death march written by a particularly tone-deaf composer. Her team, Ink and Keller, flanked her, their silhouettes barely visible against the Inkai backdrop. "So," Ink said, her voice barely audible over the din, "anyone else feel like we just poked a sleeping dragon with a very sharp stick?" "Dragon," Keller replied dryly, "more like an angry space ferret. Annoying but not quite as terrifying unless it jumps on your face." Juno allowed herself a slight smile, her focus still on the path ahead. Less chatter, more moving. "I'd rather not see how this ferret plays fetch." They moved swiftly, the maze-like corridors twisting around them like a snake in a bad mood. The Zeeth ship was full of surprises, most of them unpleasant, but they'd adapted. Adaptation was humanity's party trick. After all, right after sarcasm and poor decision-making. As they rounded a corner, the ship's security drones buzzed to life, their mechanical whirring a warning sign that demanded immediate attention. "Of course," Juno muttered under her breath, because running in a straight line was too easy. Ink tapped her wrist comp with practiced fingers, her grin the kind that usually came before something exploded. "I can rig a distraction, maybe give us a head start. How do we feel about a little chaos on a scale from bad idea to epic disaster? Is there a third option?" Keller asked with feigned optimism. "Like mild inconvenience?" "Nope," Ink replied, already setting to work. "We're aiming for full-blown mayhem." The ship shuddered beneath them, a low groan reverberating through the hull. Juno quickly recalibrated her mental map of the place, plotting their course with the kind of precision she usually reserved for picking fights she could actually win. "Whatever you're doing, make it fast," Juno urged, her eyes scanning the corridor for threats. "Zeeth hospitality doesn't usually include a mint on the pillow, more like a knife in the back." Ink gave a thumbs up, and with a final tap the ship responded. A series of small detonations could be heard in the distance, more an annoyance than a threat, but enough to draw attention away. "That should keep them busy," she said, satisfaction lacing her words. As they continued through the endless warren of hallways, Juno's mind raced. They needed more than just momentary distractions. They needed a plan that could tip the scales, something to shake the Zeeth's confidence and give them a fighting chance. The idea sparked in her mind, dangerous but tempting. "All right," Juno said, taking charge with the authority of a captain who's had enough of this nonsense. "We've been playing defense. Time to switch things up. We're going to hit them where it hurts." "Are we talking metaphorically or are we actually doing some damage?" Keller asked, his voice a mix of hope and sarcasm. "Both," Juno replied. "We need to rally the others, create enough chaos to overload their systems. If we can disrupt their control, even for a little while, it might just give us a window to escape." Ink raised an eyebrow. "You mean start a full-on rebellion? I like it. Nothing like a good old-fashioned uprising to get the blood pumping." "Or spilling," Keller added wryly, "but I guess that's part of the charm." With a nod, Juno led them deeper into the ship, using her wrist comp to access the comm channels. If they were going to pull this off, they'd need every captive who could hold a weapon and shout loud enough to be heard over the alarms. "Attention, everyone trapped in this hellhole," Juno announced into the comm, her voice steady and commanding. "This is Captain Juno Sable, and I've got a proposition for you. How about we stop playing by their rules and show the Zeeth what a bad idea it is to underestimate humans?" Static crackled in response, followed by a chorus of hesitant voices. Fear, confusion, anger, all the emotions she could expect from people pushed to their limits, but beneath it all she could sense the spark of defiance that had kept them all alive this far. "Look, I know this sounds crazy," Juno continued, "but we've got a shot here. If we can band together, disrupt their systems, we can make a break for it. We're not just fighting for survival, we're fighting for freedom." More voices joined the fray, a rumble of agreement that grew louder by the second. Juno could almost feel the unity forming, a tangible force that might just be enough to shift the tide in their favor. "Now or never, folks," she finished. Let's give these bastards a show they'll never forget. The ship's corridors seemed to pulse with newfound energy as they moved, a collective determination driving them forward. Juno led her team to the central hub, the heart of the ship's operations, where they'd stand the best chance of causing some real damage. As they approached, the sound of footsteps echoed behind them, other captives rallying to the call. The sight of their fellow prisoners, faces grim but resolute, bolstered Juno's resolve. They were a ragtag bunch, bound by desperation and the promise of something better. "Ready?" Ink asked, her eyes dancing with anticipation. "Ready," Juno replied, her voice unwavering. "Let's make some noise." They surged forward as one, a wave of humanity crashing against the Zeith's carefully constructed tyranny. The central hub was a cacophony of alarms and shouting as the captives overwhelmed the Zeith guards, their sheer numbers tipping the balance. Juno fought with a fierce determination, her staff a blur as she parried strikes and delivered her own. Each blow was a testament to their struggle, a reminder that they were more than just pawns in somebody else's game. Ink and Keller were at her side, the three of them moving with a fluidity that spoke of their shared experiences. It wasn't pretty, but it was effective, and sometimes that was enough. As they fought, Juno's thoughts turned to the systems they needed to disrupt. The central hub housed the controls for the ship's operations, including the energy barriers that kept them trapped. If they could bring those down, the path to freedom would open. "Cover me," she called to Ink and Keller, who immediately shifted to guard her position. Juno dove toward the control panel, her fingers dancing over the keys with a familiarity born of countless hours spent in similar situations. The system was layered with security, but desperation and adrenaline made a potent combination. "Come on, you damn machine," she muttered, coaxing the controls into compliance. "Work with me for once." The system beeped in protest, but slowly, Juno could see the barriers beginning to flicker on the screens. The ship was fighting back, but she was relentless, her focus narrowing to a single point: freedom. In the chaos around her, the captives continued their battle, a fierce determination driving them to greater heights. The Zeith guards were formidable, but they hadn't counted on the strength of human ingenuity or the thrill of sticking it to their oppressors. "Almost there," Juno said, her voice tight with concentration. Ink and Keller held their ground, fending off attackers with a tenacity that defied the odds. They were battered and bruised, but unbroken, and Juno couldn't help but feel a swell of pride for her team. Finally, with a triumphant beep, the system yielded. Juno's heart soared as the barriers on the screens flickered and died, the path to freedom finally clear. "We did it," she breathed, the words barely audible over the clamor. The hub erupted into cheers, the captives' victory cries ringing through the halls. It was a small victory, but one that might just tip the balance in their favor. Juno stood, her gaze sweeping over the scene. They'd come so far, fought so hard, and now they had a chance. A real, honest-to-goodness chance to escape this nightmare. But they weren't out of the woods yet. The Zeith wouldn't take this rebellion lying down, and Juno knew they'd need to move quickly to capitalize on their advantage. "All right, listen up," she called, her voice cutting through the noise. "We've got a window, but it won't last long. Stick together, watch each other's backs, and let's get the hell out of here." Ink and Keller fell in beside her, their expressions mirroring her own resolve. This was it, the moment they'd been fighting for, a chance to turn the tables and seize control of their destiny. As they moved out, the ship seemed to shudder beneath their feet, a reminder of the Zeith's presence looming large. But for the first time, Juno felt a flicker of hope that they might just make it out of this alive. "Hey, Juno," Ink said, a mischievous glint in her eyes. "If we actually pull this off, I might take up knitting after all." Juno chuckled, the sound a balm against the tension. "I'll believe it when I see it." They pressed on, their footsteps a promise of rebellion and retribution. The Zeith had underestimated them, and now they'd face the consequences. For the first time in what felt like an eternity, Juno dared to dream of freedom, to dream of a future beyond the confines of this nightmare. And as they raced toward that promise, she knew one thing for certain: they'd fight to the very end. As the ship continued to shudder like an arthritic hip, Captain Juno Sable tightened her grip on her staff, trying to ignore just how precarious their situation was. The Zeeth couldn't have been thrilled about a bunch of squishy humans attempting to commandeer their ship. And somewhere in the bowels of this beast, Juno Bet Zalsar was flipping all kinds of alien tables. "This is the part where things go sideways, isn't it?" Keller muttered, wiping a streak of something suspiciously red off his forehead. "I swear if I die here, I'm coming back to haunt you." Juno snorted, her focus on the path ahead. "You'll have to get in line. I've already got plans with the last 3 people who made that threat." Ink was ahead, making the ship's systems dance like a reluctant puppet. "Almost like they didn't expect us to be this much trouble," she said, her fingers a blur on the wrist comp. "Surprise, surprise, humans are a real pain in the ass." "That's our secret weapon," Juno replied with a grin that was more feral than friendly. Unpredictability. Something the Zeeth with their big brains and even bigger egos didn't count on. As if on cue, the lights flickered ominously. It was never a good sign when the universe added dramatic lighting to your impending doom, but Juno had a plan, which was more than she could say for most of her life choices. The ship's corridors twisted on, maze-like and disorienting, but Juno had made a point of memorizing every corner, every peculiar pattern of scuffs on the floor. It was like a bad dream she'd walked through too many times to forget. Ink paused at a junction, the crossroads of chaos. "Choose your own adventure time, Cap. Which way gets us out without turning us into space confetti?" "Take a left," Juno said with the confidence of a drunk gambler, "and pray that Zeeth navigation systems are as flawed as their hospitality." They swung left, their ragtag army of captives following close behind. People who had been strangers just hours ago now moved with a singular purpose: survival. Funny how nothing bonded folks quite like the prospect of imminent death. "Come on, Zalsar, what's taking you so long?" Juno muttered under her breath. If they were going to have a final showdown, she preferred it be now rather than when she was least expecting it, like during a bathroom break. The ship's internal comms crackled to life, the Zeeth's monotonous drone echoing through the corridors. "Attention, human detainees, cease your rebellion or face termination." Keller rolled his eyes so hard it was a wonder they didn't pop out of his head. "They're really selling that customer service experience, aren't they?" "Let's give them a response," Juno said, nodding to Ink. With a flourish, Ink tapped her wrist comp and said, "Dear Zeeth overlords, we regret to inform you that your threat has been received and promptly ignored." There was a beat of silence before the ship's automated defenses kicked in. Panels slid open in the walls, revealing the sleek, ominous forms of security drones, because of course, it was never going to be as easy as just walking out. "Everyone, get ready." Juno barked, her voice cutting through the rising panic. "Remember, they are machines. We're smart apes with a knack for destruction. Let's use it." The first wave of drones zoomed toward them, their weapons charging with a sound that could only be described as what nightmares sounded like when they screamed. Juno swung her staff, its makeshift enhancements crackling with energy, and struck the nearest drone. It careened into its neighbors, a symphony of malfunctioning hardware. Ink was beside her, a mischievous gleam in her eye as she tapped away furiously. "Let's see how these drones handle a little sensory confusion." Panels in the ceiling erupted with bursts of light and sound, turning the corridor into a disorienting disco for killer machines. The drones faltered, their precision blunted by the overload. "Nice work," Juno said, dispatching another drone with a well-aimed thrust. "Who knew you had a future in party planning?" Ink laughed, a wild, free sound that was as much defiance as amusement. "If this whole rebellion thing doesn't pan out, maybe I'll consider it." The captives, galvanized by the initial success, pushed back against the drone tide. Makeshift weapons swung with desperation-fueled vigor, a whirlwind of organized chaos that the Zeeth had never anticipated. "Juno, look out!" Keller yelled, tackling her out of the way as a particularly ambitious drone attempted to singe her eyebrows off. "Thanks," Juno said, getting to her feet and dusting herself off. "I'd hate to lose my best feature." As they regrouped, Juno noticed something interesting. The longer they fought, the more the drones seemed to falter. The Zeeth system, so reliant on prediction and precognition, was struggling to adapt to the erratic, spontaneous madness of human combat. "I think we're actually confusing them," she shouted over the din. Keep it up. Ink's eyes widened with understanding. They can't predict our moves because even we don't know what we'll do next. Well, if that isn't the story of my life, Keller quipped, swinging a repurposed pipe at another drone. The tables were turning, the drone's attacks becoming more sporadic and less coordinated. Juno felt a surge of hope, a dangerous thing in this universe, but sometimes the only thing worth holding on to. Push forward. Juno commanded, her voice a rallying cry. We've got them on the ropes. The human tide surged, a chaotic force against the cold precision of Zeeth technology. The corridor echoed with the clang of metal on metal, the shouts of defiance and the whirring of failing drones. Finally, they reached the central junction where Juno's plan hinged on the element of surprise. If they could just, well. A voice oozed from the shadows, smooth and condescending. Look what the cosmic cat dragged in. Zalsar stepped into view, flanked by the last of the Zeeth enforcers. His expression was one of amusement, as if watching a particularly entertaining episode of a reality show. Juno glared, her staff still poised for battle. Took you long enough to show up. Thought maybe the Zeeth had decided to give us a fighting chance. Zalsar chuckled, his eyes glinting with a predatory gleam. Oh, Captain Sable, we were simply curious to see how far your little rebellion would go. Consider it a social experiment. Ink stepped forward, her expression a mix of defiance and disgust. You're about to find out how unpredictable social experiments can get. Zalsar's smile widened, all teeth and arrogance. Bold words, but I've yet to see you pose a true threat. Then let's rectify that, Juno said, her voice a low growl as she charged. The fight was brutal, a clash of ideologies and technology. Zalsar's enforcers moved with calculated precision, but the humans had something far more powerful, nothing left to lose. Keller and Ink fought at Juno's side, each strike, each dodge a testament to their determination. The captives, fueled by desperation and the scent of freedom, fought like demons, turning the tide in their favor. Zalsar's calm facade cracked, his superiority challenged by a force he couldn't predict. You humans are nothing but chaos, he sneered, frustration tinging his words. Funny, Juno replied, her staff connecting with Zalsar's shoulder in a satisfying crunch. That's what we're counting on. As the battle raged, she felt the weight of every decision, every sacrifice. This was it, the culmination of their fight, the moment that would decide their fate. With a final, desperate surge, they overwhelmed Zalsar, his enforcers falling like dominoes. The Zeeth's control crumbled beneath the sheer unpredictability of human tenacity. Panting, Juno stood over Zalsar, who lay on the ground, his arrogance shattered. Looks like our social experiment worked, she said, her voice filled with grim satisfaction. Zalsar glared up at her, defeated but defiant. You might win today, but the Zeeth will never relinquish control. This is far from over. Maybe, Ink said, stepping forward with a grin. But for now, we're going to enjoy our victory lap. The captives cheered, the sound echoing through the ship as the reality of their triumph sunk in. They'd done it, defied the odds and taken back control. Juno turned to her team, gratitude and pride shining in her eyes. We're not free yet, but we've got a fighting chance. And that's more than we've had in a long time, Keller said, his voice softer than usual but no less sincere. As they began to plan their next move, the promise of freedom loomed tantalizingly close. It wouldn't be easy and the path ahead was fraught with danger, but for the first time Juno felt the stirrings of hope. Hey, Juno, Ink said, nudging her with a playful smile. If we pull this off, we should celebrate with something suitably human, like pizza or a nap. Or both, Juno replied, a weary smile on her lips. But first, let's get off this damned ship. With their newfound resolve, they set out to seize their destiny, the Zeeths defeat a spark of rebellion that would light their way. Whatever lay ahead, they would face it together, undeterred and unbroken. Juno stood amidst the debris of their latest victory, panting like she'd just run a marathon through a junkyard. The ship's corridor was littered with the wreckage of defeated drones, and the smell of burnt circuitry hung in the air like a poorly chosen cologne. She glanced around at her makeshift crew, all of them wearing the same expression of disbelief mixed with the realization that they'd just done the impossible. You know, Juno said, brushing some errant soot from her sleeve, If I'd known liberation came with this much cardio, I might have stayed in my cell." Ink chuckled. A hand on her hip and a smudge of oil streaked across her cheek like a warrior's paint. "Think of it as an extreme sport. Space rebellion, not for the faint of heart or the out of shape." Keller, ever the cynic, leaned against the wall, his makeshift weapon resting casually on his shoulder. "Well, if this is what we have to do to get a decent meal and a nap, I'm not sure the universe is charging us fairly." The ragtag group of captives, now victorious, began to disperse. They were still strangers in many ways, bonded only by the shared trauma of survival. Yet as they parted ways, there was a silent agreement, a mutual nod of respect. They'd fought together, and in the end that counted for something. "Hey, if any of you find a bar on your travels, make sure to name a drink after us," Ink called out, preferably something strong enough to knock out an elephant. Juno watched them go, each one peeling off to find their path in the vast, unforgiving universe. Funny how the promise of freedom could be both exhilarating and terrifying, like jumping out of a perfectly good spaceship just to see if you could fly. As the last of them disappeared around the bend, Juno turned her thoughts to their next move. They might have won this battle, but the war was far from over. The Zeeth would regroup, as persistent as a cold sore and just as unwelcome. "So, what now, fearless leader?" Keller asked, scratching the back of his neck in that way he did when he was pretending not to care as much as he did. "Now," Juno said, "we find a way to get off this rust bucket without getting ourselves incinerated or turned into Zeeth lawn ornaments." Ink snorted. "I don't know, might be an improvement for Keller." "Keep dreaming," Keller shot back with a wink. "I'm already a masterpiece." Together, they navigated through the maze of the ship, every corner a memory of their struggle. The corridors seemed less menacing now, the shadows less oppressive. Amazing what a little rebellion could do for the atmosphere. Juno led them to the control room, her eyes scanning the readouts and displays with the precision of someone who had spent too many sleepless nights figuring out what each button did. She tapped a few commands into the console, watching as the ship's systems blinked to life under her control. "Think you can get us out of here?" Keller asked, glancing at the displays like they were covered in ancient runes. "I've jury-rigged worse," Juno replied, her fingers dancing over the controls like a pianist playing a symphony of defiance. "And hey, even if we crash, at least we'll have a good story." Ink perched on the edge of the console, her eyes bright with mischief. "Crash landings are just arrivals with extra enthusiasm." As the engines hummed to life, Juno felt a thrill of anticipation. It was the kind of excitement that only came when you knew you were about to do something incredibly stupid or incredibly brave. In her experience, they were often the same thing. "All right, folks," Juno said, her voice steady even as her heart raced. "Let's see if we can break free of this flying maze and remind the universe why humans are more trouble than they are worth." The ship shuddered as it lifted, the groan of metal echoing through the corridors. Juno guided it with a steady hand, her mind focused on the task at hand. There was no room for doubt here, no space for second-guessing. There was only the mission, the goal, the taste of freedom just within reach. As they broke through the ship's docking bay, the vastness of space stretched out before them, an endless, chaotic sprawl of stars and possibilities. Juno felt a sense of awe, like she was standing at the edge of a precipice, ready to leap into the unknown. "Where to, Captain?" Ink asked, her voice filled with a kind of eager defiance. Juno looked out at the stars, her heart swelling with determination. "Anywhere but here," she replied, a grin tugging at her lips. "Let's see what kind of trouble we can get into next." Keller let out a low whistle. "You had me at trouble." With a flick of her wrist and a steady hand on the controls, Juno piloted them away from the Zeeth ship, the oppressive weight of their captors slowly falling away. They were free, or at least, as free as one could be in a universe that seemed to delight in throwing curveballs like a drunken pitcher. "Think the Zeeth will miss us?" Ink mused, leaning back in her seat, the tension in her shoulders easing ever so slightly. "About as much as a mosquito misses a swat," Juno replied, her gaze fixed on the endless expanse ahead. "Will be just as annoying if we have any say in it." Keller laughed, a sound that was equal parts relief and disbelief. "Guess we've got a knack for being a thorn in their side." "More like a whole damn rose bush," Juno said, the corners of her mouth lifting in a sardonic smile. Together they hurtled through space, leaving the Zeeth and their twisted playground behind. It wasn't a perfect ending, not by a long shot, but it was a new beginning, one they'd carved out with grit, determination, and more than a little bit of reckless abandon. And as the stars streaked by, painting trails of light against the darkness, Juno couldn't help but feel a spark of something she hadn't truly felt in a long time. Hope, not the naive kind that believed in happy endings and fairy tales, but the kind that knew things were never easy, never simple, but worth fighting for nonetheless. Here's to chaos. Ink toasted, raising an imaginary glass as they sailed through the stars. To chaos, Keller and Juno echoed, their voices a promise to each other and to the universe that whatever came next, they'd meet it head-on, with a grin and a healthy dose of sarcasm. As they ventured into the unknown, Juno reflected on their journey, the trials, the battles, the unexpected allies, and the bitter foes. Through it all, one truth stood out. Humans were a stubborn, resilient bunch. Maybe that was their greatest strength. Maybe that was why, in a universe that seemed to delight in stacking the odds against them, they still managed to find a way forward. And maybe, just maybe, that was enough. The ship sailed on, a solitary speck in the vast expanse, carrying with it the hopes, dreams, and defiant spirit of those who refused to be tamed. Whatever lay ahead, Juno knew they'd face it together, with a laugh, a curse, and the stubborn determination to survive. "Hey, Juno," Ink said, breaking the contemplative silence. "Think we'll find a planet with decent pizza out here?" Juno chuckled, the sound warm and rich with promise. "If we have to fight another army of killer drones to get to it, sure." Keller sighed in mock resignation. "I can already feel my arteries clogging with anticipation." With laughter and camaraderie filling the air, they ventured onward, ready to face whatever the universe had in store. Because in the end, it wasn't just about surviving. It was about living, fiercely, recklessly, and on their own terms. And that, Juno decided, was the best damn rebellion of all.